I just want to position us where we are today, which is in Minnesota Makoche, which means land where the water reflects the sky. That encompasses the three elements necessary for life: land, water, and air, right? And I think it's such a beautiful phrase that has been bastardized by the settler state because it is premised on the genocide of Dakota people and the oppression of our Ojibwe relatives, our Anishinaabe relatives. This has global consequences, and I want to talk about that before I move into the question of why Indigenous people in the belly of the beast in North America and Turtle Island need to stand with Palestine, and why decolonization is or should be the normative default position of any social justice movement here. So, first of all, let's look around us. We have street names that are named after genociders. We have a concentration camp that is literally, Fort Snelling, that is literally protected by historic preservation laws. Everywhere we turn in this settler colonial state, we see genocide, and we see the celebration of genociders. Imagine that the Soviet Union had not liberated Eastern Europe. It would be named after the genociders of Nazi Germany. It would bear the names and the processes and the systems. Everywhere we turn as Native people in this country, we are confronted by the reality that this country is premised on our elimination, to destroy us, to replace us. Today, we live in a state that justifies that genocide with soft words, with kind phrases, with land acknowledgements, with gestures towards decolonization, because it believes as a settler society that it can acknowledge that it has stolen our land, our wealth, our livelihoods, our children, our resources, from the relative comfort, knowing that the mere acknowledgement doesn't change the colonial reality. It doesn't change the social, material reality that we live in, because it does not want to give up what it has taken. The prime example is my employer, the University of Minnesota, which seized Dakota land in the midst of Dakota expulsion and genocide and sold it to build the wealth not only of the university through a land grant, but also the wealth of this state. It accumulated that land that it sold and privatized and enclosed into what is called a permanent university fund. That permanent university fund was then used as a bonding agency for the state so that municipalities, counties could draw down loans from this permanent university fund to build roads, to build bridges, to build the very infrastructure that has built the wealth of this state. This state is built not just on Dakota land, it is built on the stolen wealth of Dakota people, and it is and their blood and their death. Period. That is the reality. That is the material reality. And there are still laws on the books today through the Abrogation Act and the Removal Act that forbid and exile by law Dakota people. Sure, we have 4 Dakota communities, but by and large, the majority of Dakota people and Oceti people live in exile from this state. Think about that every time you say the word Minnesota. Minnesota Makoche, Minnesota Makoche. It comes from our worldview, our relationship to this land, the sacred traditions that we hold in this specific area called Badote, which is an emergence site, a sacred site. Think about that. We cannot comprehend in this moment in time the immense amount of loss and violence that it required to build not only the state of Minnesota, but the United States as we know it today. All the hundreds of thousands of Native people that had to be dispossessed, not only here in Turtle Island, but across the Pacific through ongoing military occupation. just so that this country can exist today. This is a known secret to the Israeli settler colonial project. If you listen to the illegal settlers who are invading the West Bank, they said, hey, you did it, so we can do it. This is our frontier. How dare you judge us for something that you benefit from directly? So there's an ideological justification, understanding, and an implicit justification, understanding that genocide is the premise, the very premise of building the United States. And of course, that encompasses a large, multiple, different histories, such as the enslavement and the genocide of our African brothers and sisters, the forced migration of imperialist wars that the United States has waged throughout this hemisphere and throughout the world that have brought people to these lands. And so we're all positioned within US empire according to this settler colonial project, period. That is the premise by which the United States has allied itself with the state of Israel. Post-1948, the United States didn't really want anything to do with Israel. It hadn't taken a strong position. Truman was president at the time. Sorry to bore you with history, but Truman was president at the time. He didn't really have a strong allegiance or an ideological commitment. And this is, of course, following World War II. And the excuse that the Zionists make is that Israel was the solution or the reparations for the Nazi genocide, which we know that the Zionists within Israel at that particular time actually didn't like Holocaust survivors because they felt that they were weak. It wasn't until 1967 when the Israeli army defeated Arab countries that the United States said, hey, wait a minute, this could be in our strategic interest to invest in a military project here so that the United States can project its power within the region. Not only that, we can put into check the resources in that region. No longer do we have to deal with these Arab countries that control oil, right? Does this sound familiar? In the United States, when it comes to indigenous people, of course it does. These ideological justifications, saying that, this country has the right to exist, this country has the right to exist, what it really comes down to is strategic interests, both militarily and economic. The United States didn't come to this land just because they were just interested in creating civilization. They came to this land because we had copper in the Iron Range. We had land. We had land to be sold because settlers didn't bring anything with them. So they had to take what was already there for free. So when we think about this ideological connection to the United States and Israel, it only makes sense that the United States would back Israel. So the justification for genocide, for mass murder, for continued war, not just in Palestine in a war against Palestinians, but throwing the entire region into constant turmoil. The United States invaded Iraq twice. How many millions of Iraqis was the United States responsible for killing during the war on terror? How many Afghanis? How many Syrians? The list is endless. And the recent death of, one of the key architects of this kind of strategic projection of power, Henry Kissinger, died a free man, knowing that he was responsible for millions of deaths across the world in the interest of American empire. He is an example. There's a reason why Hillary Clinton, why every Department of State, Anthony Blinken, doesn't matter which party they are from, holds Henry Kissinger on a pedestal because he lived a century as a free man, as a war criminal. Because the United States knows that it will act with impunity when it comes to the destruction of other nations and other people, because it did it with us and it just exported that project to the rest of the world. Now, I want to turn, I don't have very much time, but I want to turn to the question of decolonization. Palestinians, from the very beginning, this didn't happen in 1948. The colonization process didn't happen in 1948. It preceded that by, almost a century. When the British, saw this place as an area, it colonized it, right? It issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917 as a solution to its anti-Semitism, saying we can send the Jewish people we don't want in our country to somewhere else. So it's important to put this into context. It wasn't just the Nakba in 1948. This is a long-going European colonial project. So when we talk about things like right of return, land back, typically what you'll hear in the media in the United States is a moralization or a quibbling around phrases such as from the river to the sea. Netanyahu's Likud party had it as its founding party document, Zionist, it's a very right-wing Zionist party, that Israeli sovereignty will exist from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. But nobody called out Netanyahu for being an anti-Palestinian, because anti-Palestinianism, hating Palestinians in the United States is the default position. Much like hating indigenous people is the default position. What other country has a monument to a concentration camp of the people that they genocided? Ask yourself that. When Governor Walz, whoever is from the state, is looking at you and saying Palestinian lives don't matter, is like, yeah, because indigenous lives don't matter here. Just like black lives don't matter to your country as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to say those things. And so when Palestinians demand the right of return, which exists under international law, and it doesn't need to exist under international law for that to be a moral imperative, by the way. International law hasn't done anything to stop the genocide, and in many ways has alibied the genocide against Palestinians. But when they say from the river to the sea, it is a projection by the Zionists and their supporters and backers in the United States that the only end result is genocide, because it is an implicit acknowledgement that what Israel is doing and has done, and what the United States is doing and has done, is a genocidal project. It is their projection on our movements for their crimes, because they can't imagine anything else but genocide, because that's the only thing they've been doing. And it's important to point that out, because when we say back in 1999, I remember when the question of the return of Hisapa, our sacred Black Hills in western South Dakota, within our treaty lands, within our, it's the center of our cosmos as Lakota people, was being discussed, the first thing that came out was white settlers saying, well, you're going to do to us what we did to you. That's a morally bankrupt position, in my opinion, because you can only imagine one solution, which is genocide and expulsion. That means that we are out of political alternatives within the settler colonial nation that we exist in, because it cannot imagine justice for all. It cannot enact justice for all. It is not a normative position to say that decolonization not only is an imperative, but it is a necessity for life on this planet. Because if you think about what is happening right now, when Israel recommenced or re-intensified its genocidal campaign after this short ceasefire, it's happening amidst COP28, where the world's leaders are supposed to be hammering out a future for this planet that doesn't involve it burning. But currently, we can see that the question of Palestine has divided the world between the majority, who want peace and justice, who want a just, sustainable future, and the very minority who want to maintain systems of oppression, specifically settler colonialism and the genocidal project that's happening in Gaza right now. In the same instance, you have a billionaire who was born in apartheid, kissing the ground of another apartheid country and saying that he is the solution for climate change, announcing the Cybertruck, which is inaccessible to everybody because this settler colonial system, whether it's in Tel Aviv or Washington, holds the future hostage for the rest of the planet. It's not an Indian problem. It's not a Palestinian problem. It's everybody's problem. And I'll just leave it there.
Thank you for setting the scene, Nick.